14th, COVID-19 Financial Oversight Committee. I'm going to go just slightly out of order on the agenda. I know we've got a few more folks joining us, but the second item was the Fuse Fellowship update. If we recall back, one of the very first resolutions that was approved by Council off your recommendation was for Fuse Fellowships. There were 3 positions. We funded only $45,000 for each position, and then there was nonprofit funding acquired by Fuse to add to pay for those individuals. And then we also had some costs for laptops and some supplies and things. So of the 3, you have 2 updates in your email. The 3 positions were in affordable housing, education, and resilience. You have the 6-month update for resilience as well as education. The affordable housing, unfortunately, for health reasons, that fellow actually was unable to complete their entire term with us. And so you have the reports, but the other thing that I wanted to let the committee know is that, the payment had already been made to Fuse. They were about 6 months in, and there wasn't an offer of, or an opportunity really to refund the 45 that we had put in, but what they did is offer to have another full year of another fellow. So that fellow will continue the work in resilience. So it will be a shift in the topic, but it is not any additional funds. What we've done is there will be a contract extension on the council agenda. So the Metro Council will see that there's going to be a contract extension for another year so that that fellow that could not complete their mission, their term, will be replaced with another full year. So we're pleased that Fuse was willing to do that to, at least provide another year with no additional cost. So that's the update on Fuse. Are there any questions for that? Okay. Then we will go back to the first item on the agenda. I did email you. I have hard copies. You should have a hard copy of the summary of all of the funding requests. You have one version that is sorted by category. When I say category, the community survey, kind of that level of importance. Also one that's kind of funded by dollar amount. We can take them in either order. The first thing I'm going to do, I have the one that's by dollar amount on top, and I just want to go ahead off the top, and you'll see that the homeless support and services is listed at $50 million. This committee made that recommendation to fund those 4 different initiatives under that $50 million to council. Council did defer those 4 different resolutions. They will be back on the agenda October 4th. What has transpired in between, and I am happy to share this with the committee, the council members had a lot of question on those 4 different resolutions, and they submitted all of their questions to the Metro Council office. And then those questions have been dispersed to those that can answer it. So you've got, social services, the Metropolitan housing, it's MHID, somebody help me, Homeless Impact Division, thank you. MHID and just a couple others, some of it, if it was legal, it's being tended to. So there were, I want to say, in excess of 50 different questions that were submitted. And so those are being circulated for response. And I believe that response is going back out to council, I think tomorrow, at least I think by the end of this week. So I can share those responses with the committee also. It's not really coming back to the committee, but I just thought you would appreciate seeing some of the depth that went into not only more, I'll say, meat to the bone on the resolutions, but also then some of the questions that came from council. So that $50 million I still have on this sheet simply because it hasn't been passed by council yet, but you as a committee have already made that recommendation. And so we won't talk about that one any further today unless you have questions on that. Okay. Couple ways to skin this cat. Do we want to just walk down number by number? Oh, go ahead, Sarah. Oops, let me get your mic. On. Okay.
Just one quick question, follow up on the homelessness funds. If for some reason, ultimately, the amount that is passed by the council is less than the full amount, presumably then it would just come back into what we would be considering for additional recommendations.
Absolutely. And that's true for, in that case, it would be a difference in allocation from the start. And so those would come back right away. But keep in mind also, we continue to monitor some of the spending under previously allocated. And anytime we're aware that there will be any funds, we will go ahead and make that update and bring them back into essentially the available funding. So we could go through all of them one by one. I think that might be a little bit more time consuming than necessary. The other thing that I could just, I don't really want to pick on any of them in particular, but I think the ones that didn't really have an amount, let me just give you a little bit of background on how these came to me. A lot of these were phone calls or emails saying, well, I'd really like to apply for ARP funds. Okay, what are you, looking at? What are you looking for? Can you send me something? Sometimes they would just send me an email that says this is the general topic. Sometimes there was an amount. Sometimes there was an actual attachment of a presentation, which I still have. And so in the ones that are undetermined, a lot of that was maybe time sensitive also. I can give you an example, like with World Central Kitchen. I talked to Whitney. She had some ideas. Then when I talked to her on the phone, she's like, yeah, I don't think it actually fits, or I'm not really quite ready. I don't really have an idea. I just wondered. So there's a few of those that if we want to say, if they didn't have a determined amount or a plan, we just want to eliminate those from the list and not discuss them today. Anybody see something on there that they want to discuss? Oh, good. Councilwoman Campbell.
Thank you, and thank you for compiling this list of requests. It is important that the committee review or at least be aware of all of the requests that have come in. However, those requests that did not have a determined amount of funding request or a proposal at this time, it seems that we really don't have anything to review. For those particular requests. So I support the idea of not reviewing those because there's nothing to review at this time, but to move forward with those that we do have actual requested amounts and proposals.
And today what I hope we come to as far as conclusion is that let's look at the ones that we want to invite. We're really not going to review any requests. While some of these did have proposals, I didn't send you the detailed proposals. We just want to know what's coming up on the next agendas and how we want to start to approach this last tranche of funds and how, and I don't want to say how quickly in the sense that we need to speed through it, but when do we want to have all of the allocations complete? And so is it, we actually want to complete it by the end of this year, so we need some additional meetings in the last quarter of the year? Or it's, we don't want to, I think that's what I want to hear from you as a committee is what is our strategy to complete our allocations and how do we prioritize agendas? I will say that's the number one thing that somebody says, when can I get on the agenda? And I don't always have an answer for that. That's really for you all to answer. So that's what I hope that we look at today is not so much really vetting through any of these, but really prioritizing them for an agenda. So, yep, Councilman Campbell.
Thank you. So if we have determined that we won't include the undetermined in our priority list at this time.
Yes.
Is there a way that we can group several of them? For example, if several of them are nonprofits that are seeking support, we have not, and with the first round of funding, we did do a recommendation for supporting nonprofits in a lump sum, and then we contracted, or I believe it was United Way, we're partnered with United Way. I can't recall which agency we partnered with to help distribute those funds to the nonprofits.
With CARES Act?
What's that?
With CARES Act?
Yes, with CARES Act.
We didn't do any open application.
Well, we did some nonprofit support. So were they individual? They weren't through I remember Equity Alliance and some other groups. We did some nonprofit support grants.
We didn't do any kind of grants that were aimed at the nonprofits themselves, like for their mission or their operations. It was really just like we have this time. If you look at everything that we've already allocated, we've allocated about $60 million to nonprofits of the first 129. So almost half of the first allocation went to nonprofits. So we did CARES Act very similarly. It was just that, like, if we decided it was for rent, it was at, it was with United Way. Like in this case, our immigration support, our right to counsel, even Office of Family Safety, some of their funds were for nonprofits that they partner with, interpersonal violence.
Yeah, I'm pulling the CARES list so that I could see specifically what I was talking about, and I guess it's not on here.
I don't think we did something where we
Okay.
said, here's $5 million that we're going to let nonprofits apply for.
It was a pathway, okay, nonprofit arts organizations. Maybe that's what I'm referring to.
Yes.
That we did $2 million for.
Yes.
So is there an opportunity then to categorize some of these proposals in that way, where we're saying, for example, like we've done with other projects, whether it's child homelessness, categorize it, homelessness, affordable housing, or child care. Is there an opportunity where we can, so that we aren't going through each proposal individually, where we are making a recommendation for an amount of funding to go towards a particular category, and then working those proposals through that process?
Yep. I think if I understand you correctly, what I think is a possibility, I mean, everything's possible in terms of what the committee wants to decide. If we looked at a community issue, a need, and said, I want to pull up the survey so that I can speak to one, but if it was something similar to, like, let's say we said workforce development. If we said, we know we want to support workforce development, let's set aside $5 million for workforce development, and then we will do a separate, not official RFP, but like we do a separate call out for a nonprofit that wants to do work in workforce development. Is that what you're asking?
Somewhat, but not to that extent, because I'm just referring to the proposals that we've already received. So not necessarily doing a call out for more proposals, but for looking at this list that we're looking at today and trying to figure out how we can streamline and
I think what I see when I look at the list is that there are a lot of big dollars.
right. And so again,
I don't know that there's an amount that you want to set aside. It would be a very large amount if you just put it under a broad nonprofit. I don't think we want an open
well, we wouldn't just
application
arbitrarily
process.
pick a number. We would look at the requests that we have, look at how many how many of these requests fall under a particular category, and then look at that bold number. Of course, we wouldn't be able to fund that total number, but looking at that number and the number of applicants in that category, come up with the number that the committee is comfortable with allocating to that category.
The one version of this list is by category. So it's the second page if you're looking at the hard copy of the two that are stapled. And I did it in order of importance from the community survey. So if you see like the 1.82s, those are all affordable housing. 1.83 is all homelessness. And so you can see where you get maybe a little bit of a clustering. Like 2.44 is small business. So that's where you had like Burris Hall, additional funds for small business grants. And what was the other one? Oh, another entrepreneur center request. Those are already kind of separated, kind of grouped by category.
Great.
The lower the number because it was on a scale of 1 being the most important and 5 being the least important. So actually, the smaller the number. Under the community survey importance factor.
Right, but some of the numbers, the lower numbers aren't all
The
the
lower
same.
the number, the higher in the
I
importance.
get that, but how do you explain, it was one of them, 2, 4, 5. Okay, never mind, I guess that is right. I was looking at the other
There's
page.
too many numbers.
I was looking at the other
Yeah, they're
page.
sorted 2 different ways.
Something's wrong with this thing. I like the idea of, it's helpful to see the order of importance and how they're lumped together. It would be more helpful if 1.82, and you can say 1.82, but if it said affordable housing next to it, that would be helpful for me to see what does 1.82 mean? Like, you know what I mean? So
The descriptions should give you an idea. I guess 1.86 is not helpful.
you're making me read too much, Mary Jo.
Sorry.
Anyway, but I think that there's some things on here that we can, to your point of undetermined amounts, we're going to take that out. There's some other things that I think we could probably take out, like one that I'm seeing, Red River.
Right.
Clearly, they don't even exist anymore, number one. And so we should probably sort of filter out and narrow down as much as possible from an individual perspective, and then what's left over, then sort of say what Councilman Gamble is saying.
I agree.
Yeah.
And because, again, I wanted to be fair, I apologize if there are any that I missed. And I kept a list literally from day one, both in hard copy and in email. But this was literally everything that came to me. And so even if something no longer really applies, like Red River, I kept it because I wanted to be true to the committee to say this is everything
Right.
that I received. But yes, that's kind of where I say let's filter this so that we're focused on just what really is still relevant.
So can you, since you've had more contact with the folks that have reached out, for example, like Whitney saying, yeah, this probably doesn't work. Can you go through this list and we can go through it item by item and say, this is no longer, we can go ahead and mark this out, right?
Yeah.
And that way I can mark through and we can visually see, okay, what's left over to have this conversation.
Yes. Most of the ones that are, from a time perspective, not applicable are in the undetermined. That's not necessarily true for every one of them, but we've already made that decision. I'll give you a few ways that I see some of these other ones can be addressed. And I'm going to refer to the first page, which is ranked by dollar value, and I'm going to use the number to the far left. So I've talked to Pathway about so number 13, additional small business grant funds. We did deplete the $9 million that was allocated to them. There are as many businesses that didn't receive funding still on the list. Another $9 million isn't going to do it. And I don't know that the grants, the average grant ended up being $17,500. I think when we're looking at support to small businesses, we had already talked about a balance between workforce development, which helps the small businesses, and some grant funds. There's still the loan fund that these businesses can apply to. So, when I look at limited resources, I don't know that we want to look at $20 million in additional small business grants. So these are just some of the things where it might either be right-sizing it or just saying we're actually covering off the goal of helping these businesses through a couple different ways. The other feedback that I did receive is that technical assistance is really, at this point, really needed, maybe more than a $15,000 or $20,000 grant. So it's a longer-term impact. Okay, so that's one item. And I'll go through and then let's come back for discussion on them. With rooftop, number 14, 11.9 million, eviction diversion pilot program. I think that we addressed that through the right to counsel and the, additional funds that we gave, not to mention MAC has distributed almost $75 million in rent and utility assistance, which I think is absolutely amazing. Just another shout out to MAC. So again, not that they are not worthy, I'm just looking at some of the items we've already addressed on the community survey. I will put Burris and New. You guys have not heard about the Ywca Entrepreneur Center, but they did ask. They're just very similar asks. They're both $10 million. They're both for capital improvements to create an entrepreneur center. 50 Forward, similar in that it's $8 million for capital funding for a new building. Different mission, obviously not for entrepreneur, but for services to seniors. There's an additional $5.5 million request that came through a council member. Again, this is in addition to, it's homeless support services administration and room in the inn allocations. If there are $50 million worth of funding already under consideration, do we want to do another 5.5? This is smaller, but something like a number 33, $250,000 for a fitness trail at Morgan Park, which is a greenway along Germantown. That's the kind of item that could be addressed through participatory budgeting. So you get some of those where in some of these smaller amounts, maybe that's where the conversations that take place during participatory budgeting, we just say, great idea, apply there. This isn't the right. 35, again, it's the smallest amount, but this was a small school that missed the deadline to apply for funding through the Department of Education, and so wanted to know if they could, apply to this committee. What I've heard you all say is we're really looking for the biggest bang countywide. So we probably wouldn't address something for one particular small school. Let me go back up to a big ask that, again, serves a lot of people in a very important, target population for us in Southeast Nashville, but a $21 million request at Mill Creek is predominantly serving one community within the county. Again, I don't know that we have enough funds to submit that much towards one.
And that could also go under the participatory budgeting, PB.
Yeah, but they won't have $21 million.
Well, of course, it wouldn't be 21 million, but.
But if they could scale it down to something that could go to participatory budgeting, that's a great point. So those are just some of the really quick ones that we looked at. Same with, Councilmember Johnston, sorry, you might, but with 7 Mile Creek. It's another very specific versus broader community need. That was for the 7 Mile Creek cleanup. So those were some of the things that I thought, what I'm hearing you as a committee, sometimes in these open discussions, sometimes in questions, that come to me, seem to be too specific or a little outside of the scope of the community survey. I mean, really the big items that I've heard you all, Sarah, I'll come back in just a second. The big items that I have heard you all talk about, affordable housing, which we have today, so we are going to save time to hear that. Do we want workforce development, the participatory budgeting, the remaining 13% in year 3 on the immigration and right to counsel? I thought folks felt pretty strongly that that was just a case of running out on tranche 1. There's a few that we need to take care of, like additional reporting support and audit support. There's also an item that's not on this list that is the 3rd page of your stapled packet. Sorry to throw something new at you, but this committee approved a $1 million allocation for the city's emergency response, which was predominantly signs, sanitation, sheltering. It also covered our testing centers, the testing and vaccination sites. Not only can we cover most of that through FEMA, but we've also discontinued them, so we don't have ongoing costs there. But that last page gives you a little bit of a reconciliation of what we've already incurred, which is almost the full $1 million. And we know we still have more coming, most of it in the area of services for homelessness and the emergency sheltering. When we get a COVID spike and Nashville Rescue Mission can't handle it, they send them to our overflow shelter. And so Delta T is light medical support. Salvation Army is working out in the community. And then there's security at Brick Church Pike because we do have the shelter, or the shower trailer and porta potties and equipment and supplies within the shelter, and it's been broken into a few times. We now have 24-hour security. So community cares. This committee may not be as familiar with this, but it was something that came to council spring of 21, I believe. I have to go back. I have the resolution number written at my desk. But it was an $850,000 contract, again, focused on outreach and homeless services. And it was determined that it could be charged to the reserve that we had from CARES Act, from the Coronavirus Relief Fund. And at the time, we didn't anticipate the ongoing costs of sheltering and homeless services. And so we spent all of the CRF, and that there's still unspent funds on that contract, and the services are still needed and they're ongoing. So we would like to charge them to ARP, but we don't have enough ARP funds allocated to do that. So I did say we would not take a vote, so we don't have to vote on this, but it really looks like we need another $1 million in our city's emergency response, or we're going to have to discontinue some of those services. I don't think we want to do that. So not on your front page list. I will add it. But I wanted to show you that, yep.
If we don't take a vote on it today, and we're into,
Yeah.
this is September, yeah. If we wait until October's meeting, what I don't want to do is have funds run out and we have to suspend those types of services just because we were trying to hold true to we're not going to take a vote today.
So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have a quorum. We could vote on that. Again, I leave that up to you all. The original $1 million was allocated for, I'm just going to review those items again. Yes, Alex is going to. Can't fall under other business. For review of ARP funding and requests. Okay. We think it falls under number 1, which is review of ARP funding requests and future agendas. So this is an ARP funding request. Signs and sanitation for public facilities, sheltering for homeless population, testing and vaccine sites. And then if you recall, we later expanded it to include telework expenses because we were still incurring remote related, laptop software, video equipment connectivity. So that is what that current use of funds is available for, and it will be depleted before we're able to finish some of these other projected expenses.
Is this the $1 million that I think originally was more, and I said, no, let's dial it back with the understanding that more than likely we will have to come back.
Yeah,
so this is anticipated.
Yeah, it was originally a request of 10.
Right, and I brought it to 1. Yeah, exactly. See, 10 million would have been too much. I like saying I'm right sometimes. Sorry. Well, so I don't know if I have to like suspend the rules or what the deal is, but I would like to make a motion to go ahead, at least discuss having a vote. And if we don't want to, that's fine. But I think it's probably inevitable, and I don't want to get into a timing situation where we're in a crunch and if it's not necessary.
I appreciate that, trying to manage the different funds and availability. Does anybody, is there any opposition to making a recommendation for $1 million for the Emergency Response Fund? Representative Love, I can see who's, there you go.
Not opposition, but question, and maybe you can provide this. How much are we dealing with remaining total funds?
We have 129 million allocated. We have 129 million that's not been awarded by council, but the committee has made a $50 million recommendation. So 79 million for this committee to make recommendations to council.
Okay. And that 50 is on this list at number 10, the homeless support?
Yes.
Is that the only thing on this list that has been recommended?
Yes.
Okay. So if we go through with this, will leave us with 78 million?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
If we recommended 1 million, we'd have roughly 79 left for a recommendation.
Well, hold on. We had 129 minus 50. You said that was 79.
Minus the one. If you did this $1 million recommendation, the rest would be 78. Is that what you were asking?
78.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay. Thank you.
I was agreeing with you, actually.
I thought you said 79 would be left.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And I will say this $50 million, even though council has deferred that and we've got a lot of questions, I fully expect for $50 million to be allocated towards homelessness. I just don't know that it's going to be the way it was designed originally, but I do foresee that $50 million chunk to go to that category, for lack of a better term.
Sarah?
Yeah, one question on the Emergency Response Fund, on the additional projected expenses. I don't know if it's just that first item that is just for September, but if that additional projected expense category is something that is sort of on a monthly basis or on a recurring basis, I mean, are we doing some stopgap funding here and we're going to need to reconsider this next month, or is this something that is supposedly going to take it through some definitive period?
So the Salvation Army contract ends in September, so that's the last Salvation Army. The Community Cares contract, that's the remainder unspent, so we know that's kind of definitive. The 300,000 is an estimate. That's about a 6-month estimate of it was a 6-month additional PO. For more than that, but we're already trying to look at how to reduce that, even if there's fencing or some other kind of security that can, secure the assets that are there and make sure it's safe, for the neighborhood also. And then the Delta T is we're about 90 in. We think we'll have some more. One of the things that we've been working with, I have to give Wade most of the credit, is really as we go through all of these additional charges that were coming through to the CARES Act reserve is looking at, are they really incremental costs related to COVID, or have they become our new normal? And what we discovered is some of it has become our new normal. And the departments have said, yeah, we can work that into our current budget. So we're trying to make sure that we're using these funds specifically for one-time, non-recurring costs that, that are still addressing public safety, public health, some of our negative economic impacts. We're really trying to still focus on the intended use under American Rescue Plan or under the CARES Act. So we've tried to eliminate some of the smaller ongoing costs. And again, thank you to Wade for doing quite a bit of that work. And the departments, kind of working with us to say, yeah, I don't think I need to rent that box truck anymore. Yeah, I don't think I need to do this anymore. Like, some of it is we didn't have things available because every department was using every resource. Now there's sharing, and we like, yeah, I can get that from here, I can do that.
And I think that, obviously, making sure that there's continuity in this funding is important. One thing, though, that in terms of go-forward costs, and this comes up sort of in the overall list, this is kind of diverting from just this one issue to the overall list, is, if we have the $50 million allocation for homelessness, if there are other areas such as this where, most of this is going to homeless support, is the $50 million going to encompass, all expenditures? Because I know there was some discretionary, there was just some fairly broad categories in that recommendation. Or are we going to be talking about additional funds over on top of these ongoing expenditures relating to the homelessness population? Just understanding that. And the same question will come up for affordable housing, because some of the nonprofit requests relate to both homelessness and affordable housing. Will those come out of the bigger grants that are going to be proposed, or are they going to be on top of that bigger number?
So the good thing is we have the affordable housing people here today who can answer that. But I think just in general, to answer your question with homelessness, a lot of that goes back to what Councilmember Johnston was just saying, that, yeah, I think once we decide $50 million for homelessness, a lot of these probably need to fit in there. And I think that's some of the adjustments that council might be looking at based on a lot of the questions that they asked. I was really impressed with the depth of questions and was privy to some of the conversation on the responses. And I think much to what Councilmember Johnston said, I think there's going to be really crucial conversations about the specifics of the spending. I would anticipate it does still go through, even if there's some shifts in a few, buckets here and there and some dollars shift. And I don't know how much is actually left as flexible, but I think that's the intention, is that we can't keep coming back to the homeless topic once we've done 50. Like, we've got to address some of the other areas. Councilmember Gamble.
Thank you. And I think that would probably apply to affordable housing as well, because the committee has already recommended $55 million towards affordable housing, and we'll hear a presentation today for an additional $30 million. But when we look at the example with homelessness and the allocation that has been with homelessness, we'll see today if what we hear today can fit within the affordable housing that has already been allocated, or if we need additional affordable housing funding. Yep. I just want to make that point as well.
Agreed. So, go ahead, Sean, let me get your...
Just a fast question on the $50 million that we recommended. That's where I'm a little bit confused. We recommended it. City Council is looking at it to see where should it be bucketed, perhaps. From a procedural standpoint, can we unrecommend it and then reallocate the 50 and bucket it the way we think we can? I think, like Sarah was saying, when we look at certain initiatives in here, number 20, number 23, if we wanted to fund those under that 50 million, should we be recommending how the 50 is spent beyond the 4 big buckets we did? Because what I don't understand is, if we think some of these projects could be funded out of the 50, are we going to recommend these sub-projects to be funded out of the 50 we've already recommended? And will council consider that, or is it reviewing it on their own?
So it'll be, I would say that the 4 original buckets are still the 4 that have gone through as resolutions. And I would not expect there to be, this committee would have to do something today to dramatically change that, to address like 20 and 23.
And just examples of those two.
Yeah, or any of them that were related to homelessness, because they're on the October 4th agenda. So the committee would have to address it today in order for it to be presented. I mean, it's actually too late to file anything. It could be a late filed for the 4th, but I'm just saying, I think I understand what you're asking, and it would actually probably have to happen today. Oops, sorry, hold on.
I'm just wondering if you remember the timing of Councilmember Welch's request, and if that was, I'm assuming it was before this $50 million idea came out. It was not?
It was after.
Okay. Yeah, I think to your point, There's these different things. If we've already allocated or in the process of allocating $50 million, however we decide to do that, to homelessness, I think at that point it's like we've checked that. And to continue to go back, I mean, you could spend the whole $79 million on on any of this. So at some point you have to say, look, we've made a tremendous investment into the homelessness issue that we're experiencing, and we stop. That's it. 50 million is it. Does that make?
Well, it does, except the vagueness of not having the pleasure of sitting till 3 o'clock in the morning with you guys in your council meetings.
You can watch us on TV.
I live in Williamson, I can't. But it was mentioned a few times here that 50 might get altered of how it's allocated.
Yeah.
And that's,
You're just wanting to be part of that conversation, is what you're saying?
Want to be more aware of it, at least,
Yeah.
because if we think, because a few times, I know I've said to a few people that have put other applications in, well, perhaps you can be funded out of this, perhaps you can go to city council, perhaps you can do this, but if that's not the case, though, the 50 is gone and well-funded, and to your point, doing a big chunk of work, there are probably some other things that we want to look at.
Yeah.
I just want to make the point that while it's not enough time for this committee to make amendments, the council can make amendments to the bill that's going before the council on the 4th. So Councilmember Welch, for example, can do an amendment to add this to that homeless bill or legislation. And that's probably the better way to go with it as well.
Yeah, and if there was something else from a total dollar standpoint, if you said, okay, instead of it being 50, we want it to total at 45, and we want $5 million to come back to the committee for other conversation on homelessness. That's the other way.
I don't foresee that happening. I think we'll end up utilizing the whole $50 million. How that, are we going to get rid of the gap financing completely? That would be my first choice, is to get rid of that particular resolution and add that $25 million to the other three to fully and sustainably fund what we're trying to do. But I do think it's going to look different. But yeah, we can make amendments. And also, we're supposed to be having a meeting, the whatever committee, to discuss this, to have like a work session on. Right, I just don't know when that meeting is, and I hope it's not next week because I'm out of the state. But anyway, we're supposed to be working that out. So if you want to come.
Which committee?
Budget, she's saying budget and affordable.
A special called Budget and Affordable Housing. I will forward that to the committee so that if you all do want to attend, I think that's a great idea.
For my benefit, I'd like to be able to tell some of the people that could fit under the homelessness and hear that they should attend or they should reach out, because they haven't done a presentation, to us, but perhaps the right place to do the presentation is to the council or that subcommittee.
What's the other, I see Welsh, but what's the other request in here? I'm not seeing it.
Number 23 is the Ywca Weaver Center. That again came in after the 50 million was already.
But that says to respond to domestic violence. Critical infrastructure upgrades.
It's structured as a homeless shelter as well.
Oh.
That's what it serves the purpose of.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I mean, should that be part of the conversation that we're having? I think so. And so I would, whoever reached out, the YWCA, I would have, to his point, say, look, there's $50 million up for grabs at this point. And so if they want to be a part of that conversation, I would start reaching out to council members that are going to be having this conversation in the next week or two.
Okay.
To see how they could fit in, if they could fit in.
One way to maybe think about this, if I was going back to look at the scope of the original proposal, I know it's subject to change based on all that's going on with the council, but there were some sort of broad grants to nonprofits to support the overall initiative. When I look at this list, I see Dismas House, I see the broad sort of request from Councilmember Welch that includes room in the inn allocations. I see the YWCA Weaver Center. And, I think it's fair to say that those are proposals that I would like to think that we would help fund as part of a homelessness proposal overall. So at least suggesting that they be considered as part of what the council is considering, because, those are organizations that could really facilitate helping with our homeless problem for very distinct populations that really need service. And so I guess I just hate to just write them off and say it's because there's this big number being considered, and so you're just out of luck because you happened to come in after that was already approved. And that's what we're going to be saying if we don't do something along what Sean's suggesting.
Yep. And thank you, Kristen. I think the meeting is September 29th. So that is something that I can reach out to. I'll get, make sure that I know the time, date, and location, and I can get back to those requests, anything that has to do with homelessness, and ask them to attend that meeting. Does that?
Just adding to what Sarah said much more eloquently than I tried to, can we make a recommendation if we choose to have certain things considered within the 50 to council, and then still encourage people to reach out? Is that what you're suggesting?
We can. I'm looking because Alex walked out of the room. I don't want to make sure that he's okay with, if that's a recommendation. This committee could make a resolution that is a recommendation for something to be considered without dollars attached to it, because the dollars have already been recommended. So I think we could do that through a resolution.
Well, so I'll make the motion, but I don't want to be the lead because I'm not going to be there next meeting. But I think it needs to be late filed in order to be on next Tuesday, this coming Tuesday's agenda, so that it's out there before we have this meeting on the 29th.
Okay. Should we wait till Alex comes back?
I guess. So I'll be number 2.
There he is. We were talking about you as you left. So we would like to make a resolution that is just asking for council to consider certain initiatives that are on this list within the 50 million. So we're not looking to allocate additional funds, but in order for it to happen before the homelessness meeting on September 29th, if we want council to see that on next week's agenda, can we late file a resolution that is asking for them to consider? So, okay, we just want to make sure we could do that.
I guess that's just, well, for late filed, it's up until there's no.
Yeah, it would have to be late filed at this point.
So I guess that's just the Weaver Center, right? Because we know Councilmember Welsh is dialed in. So I don't know that would be part of it, but I think
Let me
just to let people know that Weaver Center is even an option and a need.
I'm just making sure that if we have anything else under homelessness. At Weaver Center, you've got Councilwoman Welsh.
Which specifically talks about room in the inn allocations, which caught my eye.
Okay.
And then dismiss house.
And dismiss, okay. That was the one that I was looking at.
Oh, that was one of the undetermined.
Yep, and it's under, it's really under more of a, I think that was under affordable housing, but it is also homelessness. So why don't I make I think maybe we want it to include the names dismiss house, room in the inn, and YWCA, and that we're looking at how can those nonprofits partner in the homelessness work.
Yeah, I just think it should be part of the consideration that they actually were part of this process, but there was a sense that the overall recommendation for that particular subject matter would encompass all the funds from this committee.
Yep.
But we want to make sure that they get due notice and consideration for being part of the process.
Got it. Yes, except that, oh yeah, Representative Love is back. We can, okay. Do you want to go ahead and make the motion now that we have?
Yeah, so I'll make a motion to draft a resolution, basically informing the council that of this committee's desire to at least bring into the conversation around the $50 million allocation, the request from Weaver Center, Dismas House, and Room in the Inn, as just to be a part of the, considered in these conversations, or however you want to say that.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Okay, I have 5 in favor, 0 against. And then Councilwoman Gamble, would you be the lead sponsor? Okay, and then we'll draft that and have you review that it says what we discussed.
You can put my name number 2, please. Thank you.
Okay. Then, just to keep us on track for time, so what I'm hoping then that you all have is an idea of, let's look at next agendas. So for our October, I would think that we should really line up October, November, and December. If we don't think that that's enough meetings to get through everything, do we want to schedule any additional meetings? That's the second question. But what would be the topics that you want on the agendas to make sure that we have everything, that you hear everything? Again, I was getting feedback from you all, some of it in the emails, that you'd like to kind of hear everything before making recommendations by dollar amounts so that we don't run into this first up gets the money and then there's something on the agenda that we liked but we don't have enough left. You're on.
It seems if we leave here today sort of having eliminated some things, either because of just the lack of information or because, something like Red River, which, subject matter wise, we're just not going to take up, or things like we just talked about that are sort of redundant with larger considerations. For instance, there's several things on here for affordable housing. I would like to think that we're going to consider those encompassed in the larger requests that we will be hearing about on affordable housing, as opposed to hearing that and then looking at these and going right back into the vortex we just came out of on homelessness. I heard what you said earlier about we're trying to find things that are county-wide. I think there's some discrete projects that just by nature, whether it be participatory budgeting or whether it be an environmental project or something else, that are probably not going to be impactful to the entire county. But I think, to me, one of the real critical filters we need to look through is what's sustainable, what's going to make a lasting impact, even if it's not in every corner of the county. If we're making a sustainable impact in some area that, for whatever reason, lacks, let's say, you're talking about a park in Antioch, or lacks some other sort of service in a particular part of the county, I think we do need to consider that, because it's kind of unrealistic to think that any particular grant is going to be truly across the county in a sustainable way.
Sure. Anybody want to start throwing out priorities for agenda? Go ahead.
Thank you. And to Sarah's point, I agree that if we can categorize some of these requests under topics, under categories, and then decide as a committee how much we want are comfortable in allocating to that category, and then having the applicants come in to present their proposals. Like for example, if we decide we want to allocate an amount to nonprofit administrative and capital support, then we have a day where we have the applicants that are submitting for that particular category coming in and present to us. And when but we already kind of know how much money we have in that bucket prior to them coming in, and then they come in. We schedule a day for that group to come in to present, kind of thing. Same thing, and I think some of these, to the points that have been raised earlier, can fall under one category. Several of them would fall under participatory budgeting. So perhaps we just have, instead of having each of these applicants coming in to present for a capital improvement in their particular neighborhood. We have participatory budgeting coming in, talk about what amount we want to allocate to that category, and then suggest to them, like we're doing for homelessness, these applicants have sent requests specific to that. Can they be incorporated in the EB allocation in some way?
Right.
But be considered, rather,
Yep.
be considered.
So let me walk through the ones that you have heard. You have heard from Burris Hall, Urban League for Workforce Development, and participatory budgeting. Any others? Do you want them back on the agendas at certain times? I mean, or do you want to wait and hear from others, and then you want to bring them back? I mean, you could
Yeah,
have
I'd like
some
to-
overlap there also.
Yeah, I'd like to hear, oh, sorry, I wasn't, I'd like to hear from others. I mean, I would love to hear from the Magruder Family Resource Center. I think was an interesting, I mean, that center houses a lot of different stuff and has a decent impact in that community. The Friends of Mill Creek Park and the Germantown historic, is that something we tell them about the participatory budgeting? Mm-hmm. And just say, we're not going to hear that as a specific or, an individual request, but here's where you can find that money. And then, but Mill Creek is going to have to dial it back a little bit. Or do we add to the participatory budgeting deal to sort of expand that idea? I don't know.
Right. The original request for participatory budgeting was 20 million. They scaled it back to 10 to try to have everybody get some piece of the pie rather than, last in line gets left out. Yeah. So that might be and so when we have topics, then we also have dollar amounts. We got to kind of make it all fit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense from
and when we have, so once we make the specific recommendation for participatory budgeting, I will make sure I follow up with, those two specific organizations to say, yes, X amount of dollars has been allocated. Here is what that process is going to look like. Stay tuned.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I like that idea. If we're telling Weaver Center, so we've already sort of handled that. Do we want to hear 50 Forward? Do we want to hear from Tennessee Environmental Council? Do we want to hear from Judge Rachel Bell? I mean, I think that's pretty, what's participatory? You would think that Judge Bell is what?
So Judge Bell is looking for a case manager for 2 years to continue some of the work that MAC was doing. So again, we need to make sure that's not an overlap with the eviction prevention work that Legal Aid Society is doing.
Yeah, so.
I will say it sounded like some overlap.
Okay, and so pending confirming if that is overlap, we'll just set that aside for the moment. Same thing with, or did we, rooftop, did we just say that was 100%?
I don't want to say it's 100% because I'm not familiar enough with their proposal. I'm just saying it was on eviction diversion.
Right.
Pilot program.
Yeah.
And we have legal aid, doing work with eviction prevention. Immigration Support Services is touching on some of that. We've provided, rent above the AMI threshold in addition to the whole MAC HOPE program. So
I feel like
I never want to say that it's exactly the same. I mean, every program can have a little bit of a nuance, and I appreciate that. But I think when we look at an overall topic, have we addressed it? I think we have.
Yeah. This MDHA demonstration project provide wraparound services to individuals and families in MDHA housing. Is that more, the homelessness allocation has stuff relating to wraparound services. So is that duplicative as well?
I don't know, Kristen, I'm sorry. Talking about the MDHA pilot to provide wraparound services. Ooh, that's a microphone I've never used before. Do you know a little bit more about that?
We can find out some more details for you on that. My understanding is what happened was pre-RAD conversion, which was an Obama administration era initiative that MDHA participated in. HUD used to fund social services for the families and the tenants of their properties. And the RAD conversion eliminated that funding stream from the federal funding, and it seems like it might have been let's say an oversight. And so MDHA, along with several other housing authorities, have been looking at trying to use a small allocation of ARPA funding to do demonstrations for HUD of, look what this does for us in terms of our ability to retain tenants, to put them on healthier paths forward, et cetera. I'll find out what those interventions are and the similarities between those and the support services. So if you don't mind, I need to follow up and get a little bit more clarity for you on that.
Yeah. The Entrepreneur Center at YWCA, and I think I made myself clear on my thoughts on privately owned, anyway. But to me, that's a little bit different. A nonprofit versus a private entity maybe is a little bit different.
This could be a nonprofit. I'm just.
Yeah. I don't know.
You'd end up, you've got some similarities, and you've got capital expenditures for Weaver Center, an Entrepreneur Center, Burris Entrepreneur Center, and 50 Forward. Those are all nonprofits, capital. I don't know if you want to lump them together because they're serving different missions.
Right.
But do you see them all as the same of capital expenditures to nonprofits, or do you see them more mission related, not expense nature related? Councilmember Gamble?
I see them as nonprofit program and capital support. And if there was a way that we could lump them together in a category and figure out if and how much we want to allocate to that category, and then have them present based on that in the same way that we're talking about the other categories. I think, and there are not that many categories left. It looks like workforce development, participatory budgeting, homelessness, affordable housing, and nonprofit program and capital support are, and unless I'm missing something, that seems to be the most prevalent priorities out of the list that we have here, from 10 to 35.
Okay, so I wrote down capital expenditure, capital investments, participatory budgeting, homelessness, affordable housing, and workforce development, and then other nonprofit programs.
The nonprofit would fall under the capital and program improvement. That would be the nonprofit category.
Okay.
With a category that's sort of environmental, which would be historic Germantown neighborhood.
That one we're going to put under participatory budgeting.
But we're just going to put it under there, and also TEC and Friends of Mill Creek. Let's all go participatory. Okay.
Yeah.
Those are three different sort of
Actually, I think the
environmental type topics.
that it would fall under participatory budgeting, the 7 Mile Creek. Maybe?
But I guess
That one I
it
wasn't
just
sure of.
depends on the areas where we're thinking about participatory budgeting.
Yeah, it's more, and when we start, one of the categories was stormwater and all that. That's really that category because it's basically flood mitigation.
Yeah.
And we used this for 7 Mile Creek because that was the source of so much flooding in March of 2021. Even though we've got, Mill Creek and all that too, it was like you had to start somewhere. So this was what needs to be done, what can, and then have that be sort of a pilot program to say, hey, it worked here, now let's do it at Mill Creek, now let's do it at Browns Creek, now,
And let me get an update. One of the things I should have done is gotten an update from Metro Water because I know they were working with them with some of the funds that they did have available. I know it wasn't nearly the amount.
No. Yeah.
But we can get an update there.
Yeah. I also wanted to bring to everyone's, when you talk about impact as far as countywide, the one thing on here is Hands-on Nashville that literally touches every square foot of this county. And they are a nonprofit, but they also have an MOU with this city. Just like Community Resource Center has an MOU with this city where they are expected to serve a vital role in everyday stuff, but also when disaster strikes, and yet we do not support them financially at all. And it takes a lot to do what they do, and they are a critical piece. And I learned this the hard way in March of 21. So I think that's very appropriate. I personally think we need to have it in the operating budget as an annual allocation, but that's a whole nother discussion. But they have taken on, I mean, we've had disaster after disaster, even apartment fires and things like that, where those two come into play and make a huge impact.
And I know, Councilwoman Allen, I think primarily you're to hear the affordable housing, but I know you had thought that they were in the budget. And so I think this is aligned with something that's come up previously. So was there a third party that you wanted considered besides CRC and Hands-on Nashville?
Second Harvest Food Bank was another one that may not be in the same category, but I'm trying to remember if there was another one that was exactly in that.
I think it was those three. I thought there were three.
And then Pencil was another thing. That was a different category.
Okay. All right. I think I'm making notes. There's one thing I want to do before I'd like to get to our affordable housing presentation, but there's two things. One, I'm going to jump to the bottom of the agenda, which is just to make sure for our community members that are part of this committee, you did receive a email with a survey asking to fill out your own details. I think there's some demographics and stats that Metro keeps on all boards and commissions. It was not from a Metro, it wasn't from a Nashville.gov. So just so you know, if you can look for that and make sure you fill that out.
I think I deleted that, so can they resend that? And because it looked really wonky, and when I clicked it, it had, and then I thought, well, don't they have all this information for the council members anyway?
And they might, but let me.
But whatever's in there was wrong. It had me, the address was where I was.
Okay.
I would have sent it because I would have deleted it.
Yeah, it looked wonky.
I'll resend it. I'll get it and I'll resend it to this committee. I'll make sure that I can resend it. Sometimes those links.
And do we need to fill that out? Because since
I'll ask.
It's a little redundant probably, but
Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy to do it.
I'm guessing no, but I don't want to guess. So let me ask the clerk's office. And then I think the other thing that would be helpful in this conversation of allocation of funds, somebody had asked, and Representative Love is here and said he would bring us an update on the state's allocation of funds. Again, just an idea of making sure that we're not duplicating efforts. And it's just really helpful to know where some of the other funding is going. So Representative Love, if I could have you give us that update before we turn it over to affordable housing. Turn your mic on. Oops. There you go.
Thank you, and thank all the committee members for work they've been doing, and of course staff for the work you've done to get us to a place where we can have some organized understanding of what we have. So the state of Tennessee received $3,725,832,113. We put together a Tennessee Resiliency Plan that we thought would be best to capture a lot of what may be coming to us for request. And that plan was approximately $3,427,846,716.02, right? Which left about $297,984. $297,984,984 $984,918. And that was as of our July meeting. Out of that meeting, we made allocations that left us a balance of $182,491,478. And so I wanted to give you just some of the things that we did have in our resiliency plan. A lot of it dealt with shoring up highways and sewer and broadband issues across the state. This was something that we thought would be beneficial to our smaller counties that did not get a chance to have the direct allocation come to them because of their population size. And deferred maintenance across the state with areas around health also gave us a chance to look at putting in some health facilities and infrastructure changes and support for them. And I think we were able to do this because we spent a good portion of our CARES Act money on small businesses. We spent a good portion of CARES Act money on getting people some rent assistance and getting some other things in place. So we didn't have to come back with that at the state level for the ARP funding, but then we're able to find ways to work that out. Coincidentally, though, we did discover that we had, as a result of many factors, a huge deficiency in child care across the state. There just in our rural areas are not a lot of child care providers. And so part of the allocation in this last meeting was $115 million to a program, $19 million, $370,840 for a pilot program between DHS and some program providers to see if they could expand child care providing across the state. So what we're doing here, for what I could see with our ARP funding, is in line with what Nashvillians need, and it does not overlap with what the state is providing. I do see that it's working in conjunction with it, and I think that's one of the benefits we have of having our own allocation, is that we're not having to make requests and be in line with other counties waiting for the buckets of money to come down, but have been able to provide our own programs for that. And again, just for an example of the Resiliency Plan, we had dollars set aside for health laboratories, which is a major piece. We also discovered that many of our hospitals, public and private, when they said things like they did not have bed space for patients in the hospital because of COVID-19, it was not that they didn't have bed space. They didn't have rooms for the beds to be put in. So they may have had a bed to put somebody in, but they didn't have a room to put them in to care for them. And so there was money allocated to allow some of these medical facilities to build out the space. The way we did it, though, we created a grant for them to apply. Instead of allocating specifically to certain hospitals, we said, here's a grant for you to expand your services and expand your buildings, and you need to apply to that particular grant request and get funding for that. So that's the update. And again, we have $182,491,478 remaining from that. And again, we even had money set aside for reducing food insecurity. I know that we're talking about beyond today, what is sustainable, what is looking toward the future. And so again, food science and food insecurity, food safety was one important thing. And so we were able to actually get Tennessee State was able to get a allocation for a new building, researching food safety, food science, out of that $32 million building. So we're grateful to be able to get that allocation out of the ARP funding.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Go ahead, Sarah.
A quick question. I know you're trying to get to the next part of the program, but are there any areas that we're considering now that you think there's an opportunity to try to get them funded through the state rather than through our funds?
No, great great question. I was looking at what we were having here to see if we could. I believe that I don't know, I'm trying to say it the right way. I think we've done our best to allocate at the state everything that is needed. We're even looking at updating our systems in our various departments, right? Our Department of Treasury has an antiquated system, right? We're looking at updating that. So it's funny that I saw similar things happening there as here. You had departments saying, hey, we've been really trying to get a new system to monitor and run our department, but we knew we couldn't get it out of Metro budget. Now's our chance. With that being said, I think there probably are some opportunities for us to look at some things that can be sought after. The question will be, will the state allocate dollars for that particular thing, right? So for example, if we were to look at trying to mitigate, I'll just pick homelessness, right? Will the state allocate $100 million across the state to address homelessness and allow cities to apply? I'm not sure. And we got a meeting set up soon, and it's, I think, in either September or early October. So I'll be able to actually have an idea then of what other categories we might have that some of our organizations may be able to apply for at the state level.
Great question. Do we want to come back to the idea of the additional city emergency response? We moved forward, but.
Yeah. Sometimes I don't need this. I'm happy to move that we allocate, you make a recommendation to allocate the additional $1 million to the the city's response, basically. Yeah, I mean.
Under the same the same 6 spending categories.
Yeah, and we can have that timely filed because for the October 4th meeting, and so I'll be lead on that.
Okay. Do I have a second? Thank you. Any questions, conversation?
Just real fast on the Brick Church emergency shelter, that's 6 months funding. Should we fund that for the year, or is something else take over in 6 months, or will it not be needed?
It would be my goal that we find
Secondary.
other security measures and that we not put more towards 24/7 security. So that gives us the time to address that. Any other questions? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay. 5 in favor, 0 against. Great, okay. Okay. All right, Angie and team, thank you for your patience. We could have told you to probably come in at 4:15, 4:30. But Angie Hubbard is here with her team from planning. I'm going to let her introduce as folks present. You do have what I sent via email. I think there's some hard copies for anybody that wanted one printed in front of them. This is based in the $30 million request that is on your list. And I'm going to turn it over. Let's see which mics. Sometimes I have. That one working for you, Angie?
Is there a button? Do I push this? What do I push?
Should. Try this other one. Sometimes we end up having to share that one. You are hitting it in the right place. I've got them on. Do you want to come up and use this one?
Wow, Mary Jo.
You have to come sit next to me.
Wow, okay. We'll play round robin.
No, this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. can have my seat too if you want to.
All right. Roll up. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Angie Hubbard, Director of the Housing Division with Metro Planning. Wanted to introduce my team that's also going to help to present today. In front of me is Casey Ensign, our Housing Policy Research Analyst. She'll review the proposal for housing opportunities for older adults. Hannah Davis, who is to my left, will present on innovative housing solutions. For families, I will start with equitable pathways to homeownership. After we conclude, we'll invite MDHA to come up and present on their request for Envision Kc. Before I get started, I would like to let the committee know that in a previous funding round, you did allocate $20 million to the Barnes Fund. And while I haven't seen all the affordable housing proposals on your list, do know that the Barnes Fund is open to any qualifying nonprofit to submit requests for housing development. And I do believe we had our largest round yet. Is that right, Ashley? And those recommendations will actually be coming to council in the next couple of meetings as we get the legislation prepared. So we're super excited about those opportunities. We were before you back in June with some broader requests in these areas. So we took the time over the past couple of months to really refine what our request would be. And we started originally with these requests based on the Affordable Task Force recommendations. And as we continue to meet with stakeholders, the needs that we're hearing, and all of them filtered up with experiences that we're having in the city. We know in our Affordable Housing Task Force report speaks very heavily in the beginning about racial inequities, and this really pertains greatly to homeownership. Then as we've seen in our city as we continue to have redevelopment, our older adults as well as families, especially families with children, are at risk of losing housing and not being able to find housing to replace that because we're really not creating that housing for, especially for families and or for older adults to move into. So we brought that approach to our conversations. You'll see that really our all of our proposals are very heavily structured to create new inventory. When we're faced with creating over 50,000 units in the next 10 years, we really want to take this opportunity, but it's not just creating more inventory that's affordable. We are using this to be transformative for these populations to do some systems building. So we started that with convening working groups around 3 of these initiatives. We invited all members of the Affordable Housing Task Force to sign up for a working group. Then we specifically reached out to stakeholders. So for example, with Pathways to Equitable Homeownership, we had a representative from the Nashville Realtors Association, Nashville Association of Real Estate Brokers. We had bankers. We had fair housing advocates. We had affordable housing advocates. For housing for older adults, we had 4 organizations that do home repairs. We had AARP, Ywca, a number, so you can see the number of stakeholders. And we started out with reviewing the problem from A to Z, the issues around these systemic housing crises, and map the ecosystem. What resources exist currently in different spaces, and then where are the gaps? And also going back to the intent of the ARPA funds, on July 27th, Treasury actually issued guidelines that really helped us get to the level of fidelity on what really meets the eligibility and intent of these funds, and helped us to refine that, getting back to it's really inventory focused. We're glad now to present to you these requests. I believe at the last committee meeting, it was requested we take each one separately. So I will start, I'll pause to see if there are any questions here before we move into Pathways to Equitable Homeownership. Okay, I will get started. As we mentioned back in June when we presented on this request, that inequities in homeownership really lead to also inequities in wealth building. The racial wealth gap has been historic in our country. We all know, but I'll just give you a piece of data that we had in our last. In Davidson County, 62% of all white households own homes, but only 38% of black households own homes. So if we made the black households to increase the rate of homeownership as white households, we need an additional 17,500 homes. For Hispanic homeowners, we would need to increase that amount to 5,800. And we know also statistics from the pandemic had a disproportionate impact on black and brown households. So not only are we addressing historic inequities, we're also addressing the impacts of the pandemic. So as our working group really vetted what we could do in this space, as we did our ecosystem mapping, we did find through our partners that there are down payment assistance programs, there are organizations that do mortgage counseling, financial literacy. There are even down payment assistance and lending programs now that are targeting black and brown households. But what was lacking is a resource to connect people that have not been able to access these resources to them and bring those partners together. So that is the justification behind the Equitable Homeownership Network of partnering with a community-based nonprofit or a coalition of nonprofits that could build this network. We heard that trust building was one of the biggest issues, especially when it's led by a governmental entity, so we wanted to make sure and get at that community-based level, build that trust, connect people to those resources to make them mortgage ready. Right now, this might not be a great time to buy a home, which is really a great time to get people into the pipeline. So when rates adjust, they are prepared to buy a home. The largest request for $9.5 million is to create a new inventory following a shared equity or collective housing model. This allows us to target households with incomes at 80% or below of the area median income. Traditionally, that is in and of itself is a barrier into home ownership. So the shared equity reduces that barrier into home ownership and allows us to go to deeper affordability. And so by partnering with an organization or organizations that have experience in shared equity or collective housing, think of cooperatives, this gives us an opportunity then to create that inventory and get people into housing at a much lower income level than would traditionally. And we based our metrics on what we're seeing funding requests come in through the Barnes Fund. That's really our litmus test. So we currently see public funding coming in around $125,000 for a home ownership. It still costs as much to build this type of housing as really it would for others. I think that comes in about 30% or maybe up to half on a home ownership piece. And then the investment for the Equitable Home Ownership Network really evens out to about $5,000 per person that we would expect or we would want to target as participating through this pipeline to become mortgage ready. And with that, on the backside, it's just, again, continued justification on wealth building for families, but also that housing stability. Home ownership is critically important to stabilizing neighborhoods and families, and it also frees up the rental inventory pipeline so that we can move other people through. So we have to address housing through this comprehensive pipeline of it's not just about one product, one income target, but it is as a comprehensive strategy. And again, the affordability period from Treasury is a minimum of 20 years. We are working through, we're working hand in hand with some of the review of Metro's publicly owned inventory to see what could be utilized. This would be a great opportunity to use a land trust model to have that perpetual affordability. So that would be our goal if we were able to use Metro land. If we were able to partner with an entity that has its own land requires it, then there would be a minimum of a 20-year affordability restriction. And with that, I'll conclude and answer any questions about this particular request.
All right, I'll go from my left to right. Turn, Representative Love. Sorry. Representative Love. I'm going to start with the back and go forward.
Thank you for this presentation on this part here. Have you identified any metro land that could be utilized for that land trust?
Currently, General Services has engaged Ernst & Young, who is doing a comprehensive inventory of Metro-owned properties. They're to get me that list within the next month. We are going to partner with a firm that is already under contract with Metro to start the feasibility analysis of what is developable property, and then we really want to target areas where there might be high rental in an area, and introducing homeownership could stabilize it. So there will be a strategic approach on where we could target the property for this activity and the other activities that we will be discussing.
Okay, thank you for that.
Councilman Gamble.
Thank you, and thank you for this thorough presentation. You just answered my question about the land trust, but what, with the housing opportunities for older adults, what is there was a term that was used, sharing, shared, yes, home sharing.
Okay, Casey, well, Casey's actually going to give you a very good presentation of the older adults request, so she'll be glad to explain that.
Thank you.
I just want to express extreme support for going the route of Metro-owned land being utilized, because at that point, I mean, when you talk about affordable housing, when that affordability expires, we're right back where we were. And 20 years sounds like a really long time, but it's not. I just graduated from college 20 years ago. You know, I mean, it happens really fast. And so at that point, if it's Metro-owned land, we can be mission-based around the affordability and not mission-based for a little while and then it's money-based, right? So I really, I don't know, are we supposed to be voting on this tonight? Okay. I really am interested to hear what Ernst & Young has to say about that and what that opportunity is before we vote on this, because I would love to sort of make that a rule. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not on the committee, but I did come specifically to hear this stuff. And I'm excited about the shared equity model, because that really has a potential for perpetual affordability, which is really powerful. And one question I have is in some versions of shared equity, we own the land and then the person owns the home, and then they have the opportunity for their equity to grow, and so they benefit in that way, but it's limited, and that's how we keep it affordable. Does that therefore mean that we will begin to get property taxes from property that we're currently not getting property taxes from?
Yes, on property where we use Metro-owned land that currently is not generating property taxes.
That seems like a side benefit right there. I mean, in addition to the perpetual shared equity. So I hope that we can get all the details worked out on this and support it.
Thank you.
Sarah?
Yeah, just one quick question. It's actually on the less significant portion of the expenditure, but the $5,000 a person kind of approach for getting the sort of homeownership network put in place. I'm not quite sure if the money's going for personnel or what, but I mean, what is it that would prevent us from being able to have a sustainable network as opposed to one that really has what sounds like a relatively limited life?
We would look for in an RFP a partner that in their proposal provide a plan for long-term sustainability and how they could fundraise or get funding through other sources to maintain this network moving forward, but also just to bring people to the table to even know who's out there, so that even if the housing division later could create or keep this going through a roundtable discussion. The challenge with it currently is there's so many different private sector players in this space, that having a partner that could go out over the next 3 years, bring them all to the table, and then look to something like Convergence Memphis is a model on how that they've actually created a nonprofit that's geared to this, and that nonprofit's actually getting money from some of the banks and other folks through, you know, and that could be a CRA investment. So those would be some of the strategies to make this long-term.
And that was kind of where I was going, is there's so many banks that have CRA obligations and, you know, can do more and want opportunities to do more. And so anything that we can do with whatever investment we make to try to create a framework for a sustainable operation and not one that just sort of filters away after some immediate activity. Because as you say, getting people mortgage ready, it may not be economy ready for them to use that information. And so just having a place that people can count on to go long-term, to me, is just something we really got to make a goal.
Absolutely, and we believe our approach to be systems changing is, as we scope these RFPs for the partners, to find ways to keep this sustaining, or we use them as a pilot for the creation of another opportunity that can be sustained through other resources.
Any other questions on this section? All right.
All right, well, I'm going to turn it over to Casey Ensign for housing opportunities for older adults.
All.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Casey Ensign. So the next funding request we will be reviewing is the one focused on advancing housing security for older adults. As Angie mentioned, we know that the number of older adults age 65 and over continues to grow in Davidson County, and we know that older adults are especially vulnerable to the pressures of this hot housing market. I'm going to share some recent census data, and you'll notice that I'll be talking a lot in terms of data around adults 65 and older, and that's just because how census data breaks it down. But most of our proposals will be targeted to households 62 or older, and that's because most federal programs are shifting from 65 plus to 62 plus, so we wanted to make sure that we were being consistent. So just some general data points to kind of frame sort of our proposals and what we were considering when we were developing these. It has to do with cost burden and the percentage of households, both homeowners and renters who are 65 plus, the percent that are cost burden. So according to census data, over 50% of senior renters in Davidson County are cost burden, and nearly 25% of senior homeowners are cost burden. And cost burden means that they're spending more than 30% of their gross income on housing costs. And we know for seniors in particular who may have additional costs related to healthcare, additional dollars spent on housing may result in them not being able to spend money on other critical necessities. So the data here strongly suggested that there was a need for interventions or solutions that supported not just homeowners, but also senior renters. So you'll see that in our proposals, we have suggestions that will support both populations. We had a very engaged work group, as Angie mentioned. Several nonprofits were part of our work group over, I think it was a 6-week period. We met weekly. Many of them represented home repair programs, in addition to programs that serve seniors a little bit more broadly. So these proposals reflect their ideas as well as innovative and evidence-based models that have been proven successful in other parts of the country. So the first activity that we're requesting funding for is for $6.5 million to be allocated for new construction or acquisition and rehab of rental housing for adults 62 and older. This rental housing would target specifically households earning at or below 60% of the area median income. And we came up with that target looking at, again, the data. So 50% or more of seniors are earning 80% of the area median income or below currently. According to census data, it's a little bit outdated from 2019, but the median household income for adults 65 or older was around $49,000. So again, that would mean 50% of our seniors are earning 80% of the AMI or below currently. So we really wanted to make sure that we were targeting households who were most of need of services or support, which is why we made the decision to target a lower AMI being 60% instead of 80%. With $6.5 million, we anticipate that we could develop approximately 100 new units. The cost to build a new unit right now is roughly around $300,000. And so with $6.5 million, we'd be able to cover a little over 20% of the cost of each unit. As Angie mentioned, for the other proposals related to new inventory, we would look at the opportunity for Metro-owned land and the possibility to leverage that as a resource. And our method for distribution for this would be recommended through the Barnes Fund. Barnes has a history of supporting developments for seniors, and it's we felt that that would be an appropriate avenue to build new inventory. And the second proposal is for shared housing improvements. And this proposal would serve specifically senior homeowners. 75% of seniors in Davidson County are homeowners, so there's definitely a need to target that population specifically. And a growing amount of research has shown the multitude of benefits around intergenerational living. So you'll see we have a theme in our proposals really focused on intergenerational living due to the growing amounts of research that really suggest the benefits that this will have on a senior. So we heard from our nonprofit partners who are currently assisting senior households of the need for a flexible funding source that would provide improvements to the senior's home, enabling an older adult to age in place and have a quality of life. And so what we're requesting is for $1.2 million to be used to make repairs or improvements to create additional living space, including an attached accessory dwelling unit or an ADU. So seniors age 62 or up who are earning 80% of the AMI or below would be eligible for assistance. And the funding could be used for three primary purposes. One, to enable a space of the home to be rented through the home sharing program, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. Two, to create a safe space for on-site care. Or three, to accommodate for multi-generational housing. I wanted to give a tad more context for what we meant by space for on-site care. This would allow a senior homeowner who has medical needs to have a space repaired or even built in their home that could accommodate a nurse or a caretaker to help assist that senior be able to age in place. And in terms of the multi-generational households, there is some great research that I saw recently from the Hubbard Center for Joint Housing Studies around multi-generational housing. And it's nearly quadrupled in the past decade. There was a 271% increase from 2011 to 2021 of the number of households who are living in multi-generational households. And multi-generational living is also more prevalent among Black, Asian, and Hispanic households. So we felt it was really important to make sure that given especially that more people of color, more seniors of color are are living in multi-generational households or may be interested in living in multi-generational households, that they would be eligible for assistance to get repairs or home improvements to their house to make sure that their house was safe for having additional occupants. We know with COVID the importance of having private spaces, especially for our seniors. And so this funding could be used to, create perhaps a basement with a separate entrance for a senior if they had, say, a child or daughter who is living with them, but perhaps there's a COVID spike again and they need to be able to have a private entrance. So just giving some more context around what we were thinking in terms of the need for having this type of option. And the plan here would be to put out an RFP to identify one or more nonprofit partner who would carry out these services. And so again, those services would be home repairs or improvements to the household. And one reason why our requests are focused on co-housing so households that would have one or more occupant is because we already have existing resources for home repairs that focus specifically on households who, or focus more broadly on households who may just be a single adult rather than say living with a caretaker or living in multi-generational households, but there really was no specific resource to really fill this need, and that was a little bit more flexible than the current home repair programs that we have currently. And so the last request is for funding to launch a home sharing program. And so what exactly is a home sharing program? It's an innovative idea where senior homeowners offer spare rooms or an accessory dwelling unit in their home for rent to home seekers searching for affordable, healthy, and safe housing. Home sharing is not intended to be used as a short-term rental option, but rather would serve as a longer-term option for renters, say 6 months or longer. Home sharing offers benefits for both the senior homeowner as well as the renter. Home sharing has been shown to increase sense of security, reduce social isolation while aging in place, create a new source of monthly income for homeowners, offer intergenerational connection, and provide new housing inventory as well. An inventory that's often at a price below what's available in the private market. And so oftentimes these programs will partner with universities to connect graduate or professional students with senior homeowners. And home sharing programs are growing across the country. The following cities have implemented home sharing programs: Montgomery County, Maryland, Denver, San Diego, Tampa, and that's just to name a couple. There's several more across the country that I could have also mentioned. Our specific proposal is for $300,000 to create a customizable technology platform for interested older adults to get matched with a prospective renter. So the majority of programs across the country have some type of technology piece that helps, again, match seniors with renters. And the technology piece is really important because it includes safety features in it, such as background checks, employment verification, or for student school verification, because we want to make sure that we're not putting a senior, or a prospective renter at risk. So having those CT features in place is really important. So the software, again, would include those features. It would also include potential opportunities for a standard lease that the senior could use, a payment system, and there's several organizations already out there who are have expertise in developing this type of software, and so we feel confident that we would be able to identify a partner who would be able to develop something specific for Nashville that has the safety features in it, as well as any additional requirements that we may want to recommend. And so that's a little bit about our proposals. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. I know that was a lot of information.
Councilwoman Johnston.
For the rental units, for the $6.5 million. Is that, what I don't want to happen is to spend this money. I want this to go to the residents in Davidson County that need it. And so are we going to have something in place where they have to already be a resident of Davidson County to be able to move into, because otherwise we're just pulling more people in and not really solving our problem. I don't want to be stingy, but I want to be stingy. We're gonna ask for it. Okay.
So we had a team do a little bit of research on some corollary issues. I wasn't on that team, but we can look that up. But I think it might be a problem to limit how people, where they reside, in terms of maybe an equal protection issue. But I'll have to research that issue to know for sure.
Okay, yeah, that would be helpful. And then the other question is when we start putting these things online, you're talking about a population that's maybe not necessarily online. So how are we targeting our seniors in Davidson County so that, I mean, it's probably snail mail. Do we have that? Obviously, there's a thought, you're nodding your head.
Yes, thank you for asking that. And again, these organizations that are out there going ahead and developing software have expertise in doing more outreach to seniors who are not as comfortable with using technology. And we would make sure that in any RFP that we developed, we would again make that a requirement that our partner have some plan in place to assist those households who, may not be tech savvy. And I will also mention that home sharing was a really strong interest among our nonprofits who were part of the work group. And so there was a really strong interest among those nonprofits in particular to, spread awareness about a home sharing program. They have case managers currently who are assisting seniors. So being able to spread education about home sharing program that way. So I think there's multiple opportunities to make sure that it's not just those households who are tech savvy, have know how to use an app and those types of things, but we're doing more broader outreach.
For the home sharing, my only red light that's going off about that is that seniors typically are more vulnerable to predatory type things, and so really making sure that the folks that we're sending to them are very, very deeply vetted, so that we're putting good people in with our seniors and not people that would take advantage.
Yes, absolutely, and that will be a priority for our team. And from everything that I've heard from existing programs across the country, they have such great safety features in place that hasn't been a significant issue. And another thing that we could definitely consider is, partnering with I like to say maybe slightly more reliable populations, such as professional students or graduate students. So again, it's going ahead and kind of limiting the population who would maybe be doing home sharing in terms of the renters, just to ensure that, we're not making a renter or putting a renter in a household that would be put the senior at risk.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I just had a question on, first of all, just curious as to why the age is 62. As we talk about 65, then we talk about 62, and we obviously have a limited number of people we can support. So just where did that come from?
Yeah, so there has been a move from the federal programs to serve households 62 and up rather than 65 and up, and I think this. One, I don't know exactly the reasoning behind lowering the number, but there has been changes in the lifespan of individuals, which I think is one of the reasons why they've also been pushing back or making it the population broader from 65 plus to 62 plus. But we felt it was important to be consistent, especially in terms of the rental housing with federal programs, because we could potentially have a nonprofit interested in development who may also be receiving federal assistance, and it didn't make sense to be conflicting with those, their guidelines.
No, and thank you for that. The other question I had is, you know, the making sort of improvements to a home to allow for this extra space, that's an investment that, you know, just lasts as long as that person is in that home. So it could be made and the person could either move or maybe get sick or have, you know, another issue. And so you mentioned all this, the research you've done in other cities. If there's anything that would be helpful to just sort of explain the sort of trade-offs, you know, the thought of doing repairs that make a home more safe for more people, for instance, as opposed to allowing a few people to have space that they could rent. And then, of course, the issues that Courtney mentioned, which is just the safety aspects, you know, if like someone trying to create some revenue could really be taken advantage of. And so anything that you have that's helpful, I mean, I think they're all directionally just really positive, but it's just, you can see some pitfalls in terms of the investment made and whether you really help as many people as you want and whether you possibly create some unintended consequences.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I knew, Angie, we had talked a little bit about this yesterday about liens and making sure that there were some measures in place so that a household who would receive assistance would, you know, automatically flip and sell it to kind of make a profit. So we would want to make sure that we put guardrails in place so that wouldn't necessarily be the case. But Angie, feel free to chime in.
Yes, absolutely. We would model a program like that off of other programs where there are restrictive covenants in place for the home to be used for the purpose for which it received funded for a period of time. And if it is not during that period of time, then funds would need to be repaid. That's how we enforce that traditionally across any home repair. And then I'll speak back to your question. We did a deep dive into the existing resources on traditional home repairs just to help make homes. And we've got MDHA, we've got Rebuilding Together, we've got Westminster. Those funds are available through Community Development Block Grant, Barnes Fund. What I know from my experience with federal money, and then also hearing from the providers that were part of our working groups, is that the federal dollars are not at all flexible for this type of improvement. And so this was a true gap that we have with our seniors and what their needs are. And then speaking back to the larger conversation about how do we reach out to seniors and also understand their safety, one of the things we talked about a lot was with our group, there are a lot of existing resources for seniors. Again, they're very disconnected, but most of these are offered through nonprofits, and we know who a lot of those are. So we've committed to one of the staff that we're hiring, a housing response coordinator, to establishing a older adults roundtable, so that we can have these providers together on a regular basis and coordinate and make sure that we are getting this outreach right, that we are addressing any safety concerns and things like that, so that we can have this network structured too. It's just we're not having to deal with the private sector going out to banks and everything like we did with the first one. So this one is much more, we know who the universe is that we can bring to this discussion on an ongoing basis.
Great. Councilman Gamble.
Thank you. And Ms. Hubbard actually touched on a little bit of what I was going to ask. Were there any systems in place that maybe aren't in this proposal, but that you are considering and have funding for already, such as education, maybe some type of case management for the seniors so that they aren't just left on their own trying to manage this program? So thank you for speaking to that. That was my question. Thank you.
Good. And I welcome questions, you know, to keep coming. I do want to make sure Hannah has enough time for the last section because we do have a hard stop in here. Oh, sorry. Ashley's doing it.
Thank you.
All right. 4 sections?
Yeah, there's 4, 3 from us and the one from MDHA for Envision. Hi, everybody. I'm Hannah Davis. I I am here to speak to you about innovative housing solutions for families. So the working group started with a broad category of innovation, and of course, folks are really excited about that because we have some really reliable funding streams from the feds and state, and those are crucial so that folks can do their development planning around those being available. But since this was not something that folks had anticipated, we were able to kind of push ourselves to think beyond what is typical in your affordable housing world from a finance perspective, from a legal structure perspective, from a development perspective. And so thankfully the group pushed us to cooperative housing models specifically for families, specifically making less than 50% of the AMI. And so you can see some of the statistics under the challenge section about the percentage of families in MNPS. We're seeing some really startling figures around the families experiencing homelessness. You can see that about 4 out of 10 households with children under the age of 18 earn below 50% of the area median income. And so we wanted to push ourselves even a little bit further. And so that's why we landed at 50%. Because of course, if you can go up to 60%, you typically see the housing end up at the higher end of that AMI spectrum. So the really exciting work that can be enabled through this program, which would be implemented through an RFP with a partner, and we would anticipate a partner coming with a proposal that incorporates a number of partners, because this is an area that's going to require some legal and financial expertise, because we're putting together a new model. So as you guys are familiar with cooperatives, housing cooperatives, what we would anticipate here is that families could purchase a kind of stake in the corporation that owns the property, but instead of trying to save up for a down payment, which, you know, with home prices today is out of reach for so many of our families, they could just purchase a small stake in that corporation. And what that does is not only helps them become an owner, you know, and then over time they can start to realize some of the appreciation of that property, but it secures their housing. So now they're an owner, and then there's, you know, as with any housing cooperative, market rate or otherwise, they get to be part of that, you know, co-op board or part of the voting entity that can kind of control the decisions that the board, you know, either proposes or the way it moves as a, not just a corporation, but also, you know, the property, the standards, kind of what amenities are added, and the rules that govern the space. So that's so important because we want to support, you know, thriving families, kids who are not thinking about where they're going to be sleeping that night. They're thinking about algebra and, you know, soccer, and kind of they have what it takes at a support level to be able to thrive. So we've, oh yeah, I've just got so excited about the model that I forgot to talk about the specifics. 7 million requested. We anticipate about 108 new units from that, but of course, again, to Angie's point, we'll be looking at publicly owned land, so that not only can we have that perpetual affordability, but also it helps us, of course, significantly extend the impact of those dollars since land costs are so high.
Councilwoman Gamble.
Thank you. Just one question. How is this different from the pathways to
yes, thank you so much. So I'm sorry, I'm just so excited. I was thinking about that earlier, actually. I was thinking, you know, we should differentiate this. I should differentiate this more clearly. So, you know, in shared equity, you can still have, similar to what the Community Land Trust does now with the housing fund, you know, as a typical single-family home and a single owner, and the financial and legal structure that underpins that is different, but the kind of physical experience is the same. And, you know, in some ways, sometimes the upfront costs, you know, though subsidized, can still be, you know, a hurdle for a family to get to. And so by coming down to 50%, you could see, you know, the ability to purchase a share in that corporation be, you know, a fraction of what it would be for a down payment. So it's, you know, a little bit, again, like any innovation, a little bit of a merging of rental and ownership, but that's the point. We don't want to create this ownership cliff where it's just, you know, a barrier that's entirely too far for people to get across. So I hope that answered it. The kind of buy-in cost, the down payment would be much less. And then we would anticipate more of, either townhomes or increased density for this physical structure. Thank you, Councilmember.
Any other questions? Good, we've got time for Ashley.
MDHA. If I can put a plug
Ashley's
in
like,
while
"No, don't
MDHA
put me
comes
in."
up, there's a really interesting model around manufactured homes and how they're using cooperatives to maintain manufactured homes in urban environments. So some really exciting housing work out there. MDHA. Thanks, everybody.
Sorry, I didn't mean to give your seat away.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having us. I'm Curtis Thomas with MDHA. I'm an executive program manager there. And with me, I have Mike Wegerson, who's our director of construction. So again, thank you all for the time to listen to us, and thank you to Angie and her team for coordinating these requests. So I'll start with just a brief recap of Envision Kc and what led us to this request. MDHA worked with residents, neighbors, community stakeholders that included nonprofits, businesses, the faith community, and elected officials to create a vision to transform Kc in 2014. And implementation of that vision began in 2015. The idea was to take the Kc site and create a one-for-one replacement at a minimum of all of the affordable units, which are affordable to families making 80% or less of the area median income, and then increase density at this site by bringing opportunities for workforce housing, which is 80 to 120% of the area median income, and then market rate housing above that. And the transformation plan for this site allows currently up to 2,390 units to replace what was at Kc previously. And so since implementation began, we've completed 507 new units at Kc. 271 of those are affordable replacement units, or actually an increase of affordable units. Since implementation, we've actually added 95 new subsidized units to the inventory at Kc, and then we currently have 96 under construction. So the request we have today is for $5 million to support gap funding for 150 affordable units that are replacement for the existing subsidized units at Kc. This gap is because of escalated construction costs due to supply chain and labor issues from COVID-19. The three sites that would house these 150 units are 5th and Summer, and there's a map in your packet at the very end. Blue is 5th and Summer, orange is Park Point East, and then the red, which is at the corner of 7th and Dew, across the street from Martha O'Brien Center's entrance, is a property that's yet to be named. With that, I'm ready for questions. I know you're limited on time.
Councilman Gamble?
Thank you, and thank you for being brief with our timing.
Yes, ma'am.
Considerate of our timing, I should say. Question about, you mentioned 507 units, 207 affordable, 95 new units, 96 units under construction. Are these 150 units out of those numbers that you gave us, or they're new units?
That is what has been completed or currently under construction. These 150 will be new units under construction in the coming year.
So you mentioned gap financing to take care of construction costs. And maybe I'm confused. So you didn't have the funding for these additional 150 units previously. So this is additional funding request, not necessarily to fill a gap from a previous request.
That is correct. These are not a part of a previous request. These three projects, 5th and Summer, Park Point East, and the one that's going to be named, are scheduled for construction beginning in 2023. Okay. And so the construction costs that have escalated because of impacts of COVID are what this gap would address.
Okay. So you're saying that those previous projects maybe didn't cost as much to construct, but because cost of construction has increased, you're asking for more this particular project.
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Okay, got that. And then my second question is, previously, the committee recommended $15 million for similar infrastructure and affordable housing in the Cumberland View development. Is this kind of similar to that, but at the Kc Homes development? And how were these two developments selected? Are these the Cumberland View and Kc, are they the largest housing developments that we have, or is it the location, or how has MDHA made the decision or determination of which developments needed to have these improvements and increase in housing? Thank you.
Yes, so Kc is by population the largest of the family sites for Kc, so it was for MDHA, so it was the first to begin this process. And I was not a part of that request, I apologize, but I believe the majority of that funding was related to infrastructure expenses around water, and the component for Cumberland View was related to some infrastructure around safety improvements and traffic circulation and similar. And that was an emergent need because of some situations.
Yep, that's correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions today? Well, we really appreciate it. I know you've waited a little while to come to us, but it certainly allowed for a lot more detail, I think, to be shared. And thank you all for coming and waiting. Are there any other questions or agenda items? Our last two business items, I put them in front just in case we ran right to the bitter end. So good, we are officially adjourned.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.